At 6, the Prime Minister says he's anxious about a rise in the Indian COVID variant in the UK as scientists meet to discuss its spread. The biggest increase in COVID cases has been in Bolton, Bedford and Blackburn with Darwin. It's raising questions about the future easing of restrictions.
It is a variant of concern. We are anxious about it. It has been spreading.
It comes as new figures reveal the impact of the pandemic on the NHS in England. Almost 5 million people are now waiting for routine hospital treatment. Portugal extends its restrictions on flights until the end of May, meaning thousands of holidaymakers hoping to go from next week may not now be able to travel. Israeli forces mass on the border with Gaza as military leaders consider plans for a possible ground invasion. Palestinians continue firing barrages of rockets into Israel, mostly at Tel Aviv.
This is a painful day.
David Cameron is grilled by MPs over his controversial lobbying of government figures on behalf of a business which has now gone bust. And why this stretch of a river in Greater Manchester has been named as the most plastic polluted in the UK.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, UEFA confirmed Porto will host the Champions League final between Manchester City and Chelsea. The game was moved from Istanbul due to coronavirus restrictions on travelling fans from the UK.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The Prime Minister says he is anxious about the spread of the Indian coronavirus variant in parts of the UK and says he can't rule anything out. Bolton has one of the highest rates of the Indian variant. Most of the infections are thought to be among the under 25s. The number of infections with the new variant is still relatively small, but scientists have today been discussing its spread across the UK. Our correspondent Dominic Hughes reports from Bolton.
All right, sharp scratch. Surge testing and now an extra push on vaccinations is underway in Bolton.
You have it in the right arm, man.
This is a part of town that's seen a spike in infections. 553 new cases in a week, more than doubling the infection rate.
Hold on. We're doing about just over 300 vaccines a day.
The concerns are around the unknowns. How many cases are linked to the variant that originated in India and how far has it spread?
The variant from India seemed to appear around the time that our rates started to rise. What we haven't really got the full detail on is to what extent the rise is down to that, because that's why we're doing all the surge testing in part. We've got lots of sites across Bolton that allow people without symptoms to be tested, and we really need them to do that because we need to get right down to the detail of what variants are in our community.
Next week, most students will be able to stop wearing masks in schools, but not here at the academy where the vaccinations are being carried out.
In light of the spike in this local area, it's really important that we continue wearing face masks for the next few weeks. I think it's important we all do our bit to keep each other safe, and that's the number one priority of any principal at any school, so the masks will continue.
Bolton has been here before. Only a few weeks last summer were free of restrictions.
Follow the rules. Wear a face covering.
The worry is that areas now seeing infections surge could find themselves subject to yet more local lockdowns.
It is a variant of concern. We are anxious about it. It has been spreading, but we want to make sure that we take all the prudential, all the cautious steps now that we could take.
There's been no change in national policy on who gets the vaccine, despite council leaders calling for more freedom to respond to local outbreaks. So far, vaccines remain highly effective, but new variants are the biggest threat to the path out of lockdown.
You might feel a bit sore for a couple of days, all right?
Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Bolton.
Well, the latest data shows there were 2,657 new COVID infections in the past 24 hours, with 11 deaths recorded. More than 35.9 million people have now had their first dose of a vaccine. That's over 68% of the UK's adult population. More than 18.5 million people have had both jabs, so more than 35% of all adults are now fully vaccinated. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, is with me now. So many people now vaccinated. This new variant, how worried should people be?
Well, so if you're looking at the daily data, is very interesting. Hospital admissions are down 8% week on week. Deaths are down 13%. That's the impact of lockdown, but also, crucially, the vaccine. Nearly 70% of adults in the UK have now had their first dose. So that is all extremely reassuring. But cases week on week are up 12.5%. Now, that could be because people are mixing a bit more ahead of restrictions being eased next week, or it could be the impact of these variants, including the Indian variant. But there is no evidence yet from local areas where there are clusters of the Indian variant that more people are going to hospital. There's no suggestion it makes people seriously ill at the moment from the data. So the other point is, how effective is the vaccine? Well, the European Medicines Agency said today they were pretty confident that the available vaccines would be effective against the variant. But it is a variant of concern, as one source put it to me, because scientists and experts simply don't know how transmissible is it, how fast is it going to be spreading, and how worried should they be. So the jury's out, but at the moment the evidence is it does not cause people to get sicker, and it doesn't cause further problems like that.
Hugh, thank you. Well, let's move on to something else that you have been looking at today. Another big rise for NHS waiting lists in England, a backlog caused by the pandemic. Just under 5 million people are waiting for hospital treatment. More than 400,000 have been waiting for more than a year. NHS England has allocated £160 million to fund extra clinics at weekends and virtual assessments as part of a trial scheme to help tackle the backlog. Here's Hugh's report.
Susan needs 2 knee replacements. She's waited since the start of last year for the first one, and still no date's been offered. She's a primary school teacher, but has now had to stay off work.
I kept going all last year, kept going through lockdown, through everything else, but unfortunately it's come to this year and I couldn't carry on.
She really wants to get back in the classroom.
I am upset, and I do feel that I've let the children down, although it's out of my hands and it isn't my fault.
Just one example of how jobs and everyday lives are blighted by long waits for NHS treatment. The total waiting for non-urgent operations in England in March was about 9% of the whole population. In Scotland it was 8% in December, the latest available figures. In Wales it was 17% in February, and in Northern Ireland 23% of the population was on a waiting list, according to data in December. So what are the solutions? Well, money is being made available to some hospitals in England who've come up with ideas for using technology and smarter ways of working to get more operations done and more patients off the waiting list.
Your walking is great today.
Bristol's Southmead Hospital is one of them, with a range of new plans.
And we're trying to get more people through clinics now by increasing our numbers of face-to-face and also virtual appointments. And then as regards theatre operating, we're increasing the number of lists and extending the list for longer time, going into the evenings, and hopefully using weekends as well.
I'm sorry I'm not there with you. How are you feeling?
Rebecca, who's a surgeon, is talking via video link to Julia, who had a complex ankle operation.
So lovely, if I turn it around.
What's in effect an iPad on wheels provides the sound and pictures. It's called Hospital at Home and allows doctors to monitor Julia from a distance.
Because of the Hospital at Home team, I was able to come out that much earlier. And I suppose I was able to leave a bed for somebody else. And I could come home to my own bed, which has been a sheer delight, I can tell you.
NHS England said operations were back to 80% of pre-pandemic levels. Staff are working flat out, but there's a huge backlog of work which could take years to get through. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Portugal has extended coronavirus restrictions in the country until the end of May, which raises questions over whether people from the UK who had booked to travel there from next week can still go. Portugal is one of just 12 countries on the UK's green list, which means you don't have to quarantine on return. Well, our transport correspondent Caroline Davis is with me. So May the 17th is the date when people can go to a number of countries, green countries. Portugal is one of them. but now it's not sure whether they're going to be able to do it. Some confusion.
Yes, so just to be clear, no decision has yet been made by the Portuguese government about whether they're going to allow UK tourists in on the 17th of May. But bear in mind, that day is 3 days away, and plenty of people have already booked to go on holiday. Now, as you say, the Green List was announced last week, 12 countries and territories on the list, but that does include places like Australia and New Zealand, which are not accepting British tourists. So many people in the industry had staked their hopes on Portugal as being a key European destination. We heard from Portugal today that they have extended the state of calamity, as it's called, until the 30th of May. And also at the moment, non-essential travel is currently not permitted to Portugal. When asked about whether UK tourists will be able to come, the Cabinet Minister said, "I have no information to give yet." However, she did also give information about the UEFA Champions League final, which is anticipated to be played in Portugal on the 29th of May. She said that fans would have to fly in and out on chartered flights, that they would have to stay in what she called a bubble situation and have to be in and out of the country within 48 hours. The travel industry are still waiting nervously to hear whether or not Portugal will be open, but this really shows quite how volatile the international travel situation is. It's not just enough for the UK to put something on the green list, we have to be let in as well.
Caroline Davis, thank you. Israeli forces are massing on the border with Gaza as the military considers plans for a possible ground invasion. Israel has continued its airstrikes on Gaza, where people say they endured the hardest night of airstrikes since the 2014 war. At least 83 people are reported to have been killed there since Monday. 7 people have died in Israel. Palestinian militants have continued firing barrages of rockets at several target cities across Israel. And sectarian clashes between Jewish and Arab citizens who live side by side on the streets of Tel Aviv, Lod and beyond have intensified amid warnings of civil war. From Jerusalem, here's our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen.
Vicious nights after long, hard days and an unexpected front line on the streets of Israel. Sectarian violence between Israeli citizens is a new dimension of this crisis. Not all Israelis are Jews. Around 20% are Palestinian Arabs. Last night, young men were on the prowl for people to attack. Jews versus Arabs, Arabs against Jews, all Israeli citizens. Israel's president warned that the country should not abandon itself to civil war. In Gaza, successive wars between Hamas and Israel in the last 15 years have followed a pattern. The next big decision for Israel is whether to send in its troops. Tens of thousands of Palestinians gathered in Jerusalem to pray at Islam's holiest place after Mecca and Medina. Chants and banners celebrating Hamas and its leaders were there with them on Eid al-Fitr, the holiday that marks the end of Ramadan. It's meant to be a fun time. Parents did their best, but this year it's hard. Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, upstaged by his rivals in Hamas, is trying to reflect the mood of his people. No peace, security, or stability, he said, while Jerusalem is occupied. In Sderot, the Israeli town closest to Gaza, a 5-year-old boy was killed when a rocket hit his building. His neighbors have had enough.
It's very, very difficult to live under these circumstances, and the government should wipe out Gaza, once and for all.
Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, went to see troops running the Iron Dome anti-missile batteries. He said it would take time, but Israel would decisively restore quiet. It is a modest war aim. He will need more to tell Israelis than that before all this can end. The prime minister is also struggling to save his job. Right across Israel and the occupied territories this week, there is serious violence. This was the town of Hebron last night on the occupied West Bank. Young Palestinians and Israelis confronting each other, another generation cursed by the failures of its leaders.
You know, it's one thing perhaps for a leader to fail to do something, to fail to make peace in a 100-year-old conflict. Now that is a tall order. But the issue is that there is no peace process at all, and there hasn't been for really quite a long time. So they're not trying, and more than that, leaders on all sides have made things worse through their actions, often for short-term political reasons. Sophie, back to you.
Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen in Jerusalem. Thank you. David Cameron has said he believes he was acting in the public interest when he lobbied ministers and senior civil servants on behalf of the collapsed financial company Greensill Capital. The former Prime Minister, giving evidence to MPs conducting inquiries into the affair, faced a series of uncomfortable questions this afternoon, but he again insisted he had not broken any rules. Our political editor Laura Kunsberg was watching.
Money, power, and how it moves around. The former Prime Minister used his phone book to push the case for his employer along to the Treasury, to the Bank of England, arguing for a now failed city firm, Greensill Capital, to take part in emergency loans last year. David Cameron's role was hidden from view. The texts and emails emerged after weeks of relative silence. So too has he.
This is a painful day.
Admitting at the start he could have acted differently, but adamant he did nothing wrong.
Nothing I did was in breach of the rules. But on the wider test of what is appropriate, as I've said previously, it would be better only to use the most formal means of contact via a letter.
David Cameron went to work for Greensill after leaving office. Last year, he appealed repeatedly to former colleagues for the firm to be part of a scheme giving out emergency loans. Lobbying is allowed, but it's meant to be transparent. And there were nearly 60 attempts to get in touch. A message to the Chancellor: Rishi, David Cameron here. Can I have a very quick word? Call any time. And then his old friend, Michael Gove. Do you have a moment? I'm on this number and very free. The Treasury rejected the request, but Greensill, which has now gone under, was allowed to give out millions of pounds of government-backed loans through a separate scheme. MPs this afternoon were determined to wrinkle Mr Cameron's smooth reputation.
Do you not feel that you have demeaned yourself and your position by WhatsApping your way around Whitehall?
What I did at the time of economic crisis was put to the government what I genuinely believed to be a good idea for how to get money into the hands of small businesses.
It's been an embarrassing afternoon for the man who used to run the country, coy about how much he was being paid or how often he used the company's jet. But David Cameron did deny that he knew that Greensill was in big trouble at the beginning of the pandemic when he was sending all of those texts.
They're more like stalking than lobbying. Looking back, aren't you at least a little bit embarrassed about the way you behaved?
We thought we had a good idea. I was keen to get it in front of government. But as I've said, there are lessons to learn and lessons for me to learn.
There are several investigations into Greensill, but the firm's failure begs questions about how influence, as well as money, can be part of trade. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
The time is almost 6:20. Our top story this evening. The Prime Minister says he's anxious about a rise in the Indian COVID variant in the UK as scientists meet to discuss its spread. And still to come, Sir Alex Ferguson on his illustrious career, life-changing illness, and the new film directed by his son that tells his story.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, a fresh start for the former Wales coach Rob Howley. We hear how he's rebuilding his career with Canada after breaching betting rules that saw him sent home from the World Cup in 2019.
Part of the River Tame in Greater Manchester has been named as the most plastic-polluted riverbed in the UK. A study carried out across the river revealed very high concentrations of tiny plastic particles that scientists say have come from sewage, untreated wastewater, which is regularly released into the river. Our science correspondent Victoria Gill has more.
Capturing a snapshot of the plastic pollution in our rivers. This spot on the River Tame has the most plastic-polluted riverbed in the UK.
We've got a couple of microbeads in here.
And scientists say they've now zoomed in on the source of all that plastic.
There are up to 3 million microplastic particles per day can be coming out of this outfall under given conditions. So it's very, very clear that microplastics are coming from combined sewer overflows like the one behind me, or from outfalls directly from wastewater treatment plants.
Untreated wastewater is laced with both raw sewage and microplastics, fragments of packaging, coatings and fibres from our homes, and plastic debris from industry that's washed down the drain. But treating that wastewater, the researchers say, would remove most of those particles. The fact that they accumulate in the riverbed shows that untreated sewage is being released frequently.
There's plenty of signs of pollution in this water and along these riverbanks, but this is just a classic semi-urban river, typical of anywhere in the UK. And what the scientists say is that wherever untreated sewage is being released into our rivers, it's bringing large quantities of microplastic.
The water company that operates the treatment plants on this river, United Utilities, declined an interview but told us they didn't fully accept the findings. In a statement, the company said, "We recognise we have a role to play and are involved in a wider study to understand the sources of microplastics in the environment."
And it's actually quite sticky.
The sediments where microplastics settle are the foundation of a river's ecosystem. And the scientists say that plastic is adding just another layer of pollution to an already damaged river environment. Victoria Gill, BBC News.
An immigration enforcement van containing 2 men was surrounded today by protesters attempting to prevent it from leaving a street in Glasgow. Some of the protesters were heard shouting, "Let our neighbours go." Police Scotland said a number of its officers had been called to the south side of the city to support the UK border agency. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon described the situation as deeply concerning. Tonight, the 2 men have been released. The amount of fraud and error in the benefits system has hit record levels. £8.4 billion was lost in the past year, according to the latest figures. That's up 83% on the year before. There was a big increase in the number of overpayments on the main benefit universal credit, driven almost entirely by fraud, as it was targeted by criminal gangs. Our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan has the details.
I've been fortunate enough that I've never claimed benefits, so I was really surprised that the DWP were asking me to repay anything, really.
Jo Darby was the victim of identity theft last year. Fraudsters made a claim for universal credit in her name and obtained almost £1,500 in benefits.
Because I didn't have my online account information, I couldn't actually access any support because I hadn't set up the benefits account.
It took the 37-year-old weeks to convince the Department for Work and Pensions that she hadn't been paid the money.
When you're a victim of fraud, it obviously, you panic, but you hope that there's somebody that you can contact that's going to help you resolve it. But I just felt like there was nobody that could understand what was happening. Nobody could conceive how somebody could have created an account and then claimed the benefits.
The pandemic has turned universal credit into a lifeline for millions of people. To process claims quickly, some benefit rules were relaxed.
I need to record your national insurance number.
Identity checks, for instance, were carried out online rather than in job centres. Criminals exploited the changes and have made off with billions. The senior leadership team of the Department for Work and Pensions are unapologetic about the decisions they took last spring, saying a huge number of people needed help quickly. And they say they will prosecute anyone who scams the benefits system and will recover as much money as they can. The loss of almost £8.5 billion last year is a record, but fraud on the main benefit was rising anyway.
The problems with fraud in universal credit go back way before the pandemic. The pandemic has made them worse, but there were real problems evident there before the pandemic hit.
Jo Darby's problem was eventually resolved. She has no idea if the criminal who stole her identity was caught. Given today's record figures, however, it seems many fraudsters have got away with it. Michael Buchanan, BBC News.
The Northern Ireland Secretary has told Parliament that the government profoundly regrets and is truly sorry for the events surrounding Ballymurphy in 1971 when 10 people were shot dead in the wake of an army operation in Belfast. An inquest found the victims were entirely innocent, but some relatives say they're unhappy with the government's response. A former Metropolitan Police officer who worked with an organised crime gang to steal hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of drugs money has been jailed for 8 years. Kashif Mahmood was dismissed from the force last November after pleading guilty to misconduct in public office and conspiracy to acquire criminal property. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons reports.
PC Kashif Mahmood, commended for his service in uniform,
convicted for his part in an international drugs gang. Their scam, handing over cash in return for drugs and then stealing it back, doubling their money. Which is where PC Mahmood came in. He would book out police cars and intercept the drug couriers, pretending to search them but taking the cash. It's thought the gang amassed more than £1 million. But for the Met's commissioner, the biggest crime was the betrayal of the uniform.
We have a very powerful anti-corruption capability, and we will always deploy it if we get intelligence or information about anyone in our ranks who is acting in a corrupt manner. They betray the rest of us, and we abhor this form of corruption, or any corruption.
The gang targeted one drug courier in this London street. PC Mahmood and his friend Jon Gurgel, posing as a police officer, stopped the car and took the money. But the whole incident was being watched by a police surveillance team working on a different investigation. They wanted to know what Mahmood was doing. It eventually turned out he was supposed to be on long-term sick leave. Mahmood also accidentally triggered his body camera, revealing his friend, the fake police officer, adding to the evidence against the gang. Tom Simons, BBC News, Southwark Crown Court.
For decades, Sir Alex Ferguson dominated the British football landscape, leading Manchester United to unprecedented success. 8 years after retiring, Sir Alex is now the subject of a new film charting his extraordinary life and his recovery from a brain hemorrhage in 2018. The film has been directed by his son Jason. Our sports editor, Dan Roan, has been speaking to both of them at Old Trafford.
Sir Alex, tell me, what was it like revisiting the most important moments of your life, both good and bad?
In my career, I never use reflection as part of my management. I always look forward, and the next day was the most important day to me. The reflection was quite powerful for me, you know, realising this. God, did we do that?
Recounting his journey from his working class roots in Glasgow, Sir Alex Ferguson Never Give In, released later this month, follows the iconic Scotsman's playing and managerial career, as well as the more personal side of a man who won it all.
I didn't want to fail. I couldn't fail. That was always a driving force for me. Football management is such a sacrifice that you don't have time for family.
Did you feel a sense of great responsibility, Jason, to do your father's remarkable career justice?
Yeah, I did, but then I quite quickly flipped that from the point of view of looking at it and utilising the relationship that we have as a tool to make something that was very personal and intimate.
Ambulance service.
My dad is collapsed. Alexander Ferguson.
And for the first time, the circumstances surrounding the devastating brain hemorrhage that Ferguson suffered 3 years ago are revealed.
I tried to get out of my bed and just collapsed. I fell against the shoe rack and all the shoes fell out and made a noise. And Kathy, fortunately, was downstairs. She came up and I don't remember a thing from then. I was lucky.
What was your greatest fear at that moment?
My memory. Without doubt, if I've lost my memory, it's not me. And then when I lost my voice, I was a bit terrified, to be honest with you. If I go tomorrow, I'll be grateful for the 3 years extra I had.
The film ends with Ferguson's defining triumph in the 1999 final of the Champions League, a competition recently threatened by the proposed European Super League. United's fans storming Old Trafford in protest at the role of the club's owners in the failed plot.
What did you make of that, and what's happened since?
Every club should have that dream. You cannot ever forget that the real reason for football is that as small as a guy can climb to the top of Everest. We can't do without that.
Something would be lost.
Lost.
Ferguson won 38 trophies over more than a quarter of a century at United. The complete control he had at Old Trafford, increasingly rare in management today, with the shift towards player power.
They are more fragile. They need more care. It's become a more protective life.
Do you think that you would find it harder if starting your managerial career today?
Personally, I don't think so. I think that personality to do well, and the drive to do well and the hunger and the energy, the good ones will find a way.
And you can see much more of that interview on the BBC iPlayer. Time now for the weather with Thomas Schaffenacker.
Sophie, thank you. The heavens opened today and we still have thunder and lightning, downpours scattered across the country, but the heaviest of the rain has been around southwestern parts of the UK, Devon, southern areas of Wales, an area of low pressure with a weather front spiralling in, very slow moving area of low pressure here. So that weather front has been almost stationary in some parts of the country. Further north, also heavy showers across Wales, parts of northwestern England and into Dumfries and Galloway. 1 or 2 scattered showers also in Northern Ireland. But actually some of us missed the showers altogether. And through the night, as the showers die away in the south, it's actually going to turn very murky across many other areas. This low grey cloud is going to spread in from the North Sea. It's going to be frost-free, so there's something for you there. 6 degrees in Newcastle, around 9 degrees in Cardiff. And the good news for tomorrow, we're expecting fewer downpours, but I want to emphasise the word fewer. We are still expecting 1 or 2 thunderstorms, quite possibly across western and southern areas of the UK. I think towards the east and central parts of the country, we're going to have fairly cloudy skies until at least lunchtime, and then through the afternoon there will be a bit of sunshine. But remember, 1 or 2 scattered downpours towards the west and the south expected tomorrow as well. In the sunshine, around 16 degrees Celsius. How about the weekend? Well, I'm going to level with you. It's not looking great. We're expecting big downpours, some hail and thunder as well, both on Saturday and on Sunday. And guess what? The heavy showers are going to continue into next week as well. Those temperatures are going to be disappointing. So there you go, food for thought and not your barbecue.
I've got no words for that. Thank you, Thomas. That's it from us. Now the news where you are. Goodbye.